Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us on our final session of the day. I'm pleased to welcome two human capital experts from Deloitte to our virtual stage. John Brownridge and Karen Weisz will help us explore how to embrace this unique moment in the workplace by empowering employees and rethinking talent strategies. You're invited to post comments and questions at any time throughout the session by clicking the chat box, and our speakers will address your questions during the Q&A portion of the session. John and Karen, we're excited to have you share your insights with us. Thanks so much.
Really thrilled to get a chance to spend some time with you today and talk about how we as a firm are looking at the shift from the Great Resignation to a space of great reimagination around our talent and our workforce and our workplace, and really specifically bringing some insights and trends that we're seeing in the telecom, media, and entertainment sector. So I'm going to start with just a real brief introduction of myself and then hand over to my colleague, John. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as Julie mentioned, I'm managing director in our technology, media, and telecom sector at Deloitte. I really focus in the space around human capital. My background is heavily in industry, so across industry with organizations like Nike, Intel, and in financial services as well. And I spend my time day in and day out thinking about and helping clients solve big challenges around their workforce and their workplace, given the trends we see around the future of work. And John, would you like to do a quick intro?
Hi there, thanks, Karen. I'm John Brownridge. Hello, everybody. I'm a principal with Deloitte. I've been with Deloitte 15 years. I've been in industry for 25 years, helping clients really at the intersect of people and technology. I lead our digital workplace practice, which is a subcomponent of our future of work offerings. And I'm also the Chief Strategy Officer for our HR transformation practice. Happy to be with you today. I've been in the telecom, technology, media, entertainment, and telecommunications sector for that full 25 years. Next slide, please. So the pandemic has really caused every industry to rethink its proposition to its customers and to redefine its commitment to the workers. On the one hand, the media and entertainment industry was challenged with driving innovation and challenging business models to really break generational norms of entertainment experiences from a traditional location-based experience to a home-based experience. And on the other hand, the telecom industry continues to make progress in augmenting its network capabilities and capacity with additional fiber and wireless deployments to meet the constant demand for higher speed networks. And looking ahead, we can expect to see a new set of opportunities and potential challenges that we can't see yet. And all of this is against a backdrop of a dynamic technological, regulatory, and competitive environment, as well as changing customer behaviors and workforce expectations. Next slide, please. However, throughout the pandemic, the technology, media, and entertainment industry has been experiencing exponential growth, which has been directly attributed to the demands that have been created as a consequence of the pandemic. For instance, the need to create increased demand for communication solutions for remote workers was a key factor to driving telecommunication service market growth for companies like Viacom and Comcast. Whereas providing the then quarantined viewers with interesting content to stream from home really amplified the growth of media and entertainment companies like Netflix and Disney. Between May 2020 and February 22, the telecom, media, and entertainment industry saw an increase of 170% in monthly job postings. At the same time, it took an average of approximately 54 days to fill an open position. This unforeseen situation in the gap between soaring demand and really lagging supply, which caused and continues to cause limitations to business growth, and it's forcing employees to really tackle this as a top priority at the highest levels. At the same time, the workforce has been reflecting, given months and then years working mostly at home and feeling increasingly burnt out. Many people have taken a step back and really thought about what really matters to them and what their priorities are. And they've subsequently considered changing aspects of their lifestyle. They've changed home location, and they've changed jobs in some circumstances and their employers. What many employers don't realize in all of this is just how feasible it is for an employee to be unemployed. A recent survey found that 41% of Americans believe that they could be unemployed for more than 6 months while remaining financially stable. Another survey found of 2,200 workers that 68% of them who had recently quit their jobs had done so without another offer on the table. And what this data illustrates is that the Great Resignation, as it's come to be known, it is truly different from anything else that we've experienced before. Next slide, please. The latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that nearly 4.4 million people voluntarily left their jobs in February, which is only slightly higher than the 4.5 million people that had quit their jobs last November, which was an all-time high and continues to be the record. Research indicates that to attract workers in today's market, employers must do more than just raise wages. And that certainly helps, of course, especially with inflation running at 9% in some parts of the country. In other words, higher pay alone isn't necessarily going to attract employees to or stop people from quitting. And employers who want to remain competitive should consider really ramping up other perks like flexibility in terms of working from home and opportunities for advancement. A study by the American Psychological Association found that employers that are burnt out are actually 2.6 times more likely to be actively seeking new employment and 63% more likely to take a sick day. Another study found that a toxic company culture drives people to leave their jobs more than any other single factor. With many companies like move into a hybrid workplace, it's become critical that organizations focus on developing a really healthy culture, that it's inclusive of all workers, their needs, and regardless of their location and proximity. Senior executives really must understand why employees are leaving. Many struggle to do this. For example, another study found that when they were asked why people were leaving, their response was they're leaving because of compensation, work-life balance, and poor physical and emotional health. And though these issues do matter to employees, they're not the top 3 factors that employees themselves cited as the reason that they quit their job. The top 3 are they didn't feel valued by their organization, number 1. Number 2, they didn't feel valued by their manager. And the third one, number 3, they didn't feel a sense of belonging with the organization. So notably of this study as well, they found that those who classified themselves as non-white or multiracial were much more likely than their white counterparts to say that they'd left because they didn't feel that they belonged at the company, which is a stark reminder of the real importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion at work. Women also have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. The childcare disruption caused by the Omicron surge was driven much by the elevated quit rates. Sorry, the Omicron surge was really driven by quit rates of women. 2 of every 3 caregivers in the US are women. And the additional responsibility during these times has really been disproportionately added to their plates. All the while still on average, earning less than their male counterparts. Next slide, please. So as this states, 65% of workers noted that the pandemic had really made them rethink the value of their jobs within the context of their life. And 69 of the workers feel it's easier, faster, or less costly to get a job outside of their organization and look to a new one rather than stay where they are. This has resulted in 11.5 million Americans quitting their jobs in April through June of this year. And this means that we're living in a time where approximately 3% of the workforce are quitting their job each month. This high turnover rate is really taking its toll on employers and employees alike. Many companies are having to make do with fewer workers and less institutional knowledge than is required for them to be successful. And they cannot backfill the open positions fast enough to be able to keep up with the demand they truly have. This also results in half of those people who chose to stay within their jobs that they're taking on more responsibility during this Great Resignation, which in turn will likely result in them rethinking their position in time to come. This means that for organizations to truly drive, they need to rethink how they're attracting, retaining, developing, rewarding, and engaging their whole workforce competitively. And Karen, I'll hand over you to take us through some of the more specifics around the media and entertainment industry.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. So the picture that John paints it's stark, right? I think if we're all feeling tired, we know why. It's been a rough couple of years. And I think the disruption that we're seeing and some of the insights and trends that he shared explain a lot of what we're all probably experiencing as many of you work on the front lines in support of your workforce. So before we jump into, so what can you do and what can we all do to better support our workforce? I want to share a little bit more about some trends we see specific to the media, telecom, and entertainment industry. So if you go to the next slide, please. So again, that disruption is not only broad in the macroeconomic sense, it's not broad across all industry, it's also very specific to the industry in which you all operate. Some of the trends that we see that are more macro business trends, for example, the maturing of the video streaming industry. So as we see subscriber counts no longer being the key metric of success here, and really, companies moving towards more lifetime customer value, in-person entertainment is getting much more pressure to go beyond simply bringing people out of their pandemic cocoons. And really evolving and differentiating itself from what someone can get in their own living room. We also see, product innovation happening through things like NFTs or non-fungible tokens. They add scarcity and exclusivity around digital goods, and that's really influencing new models around how customer loyalty is built. So down the road and along over time, that will lead to more digital product innovation, but in the near term, it creates a lot of disruption for more traditional models. The metaverse, which of course is the buzzword du jour, and the fact that we are moving closer to that means people will spend more of their time in immersive social digital worlds that are intermixed with the physical world. And so that by turn means we need more next generation strategies, tools, technologies to really accelerate that path. And then, of course, there is just the broad macroeconomic environment and the uncertainties around things like increase in interest rates, declining stock market trends, rising inflation. And if that doesn't necessarily cast a gloom over the future, it does continue to exacerbate that sense of disruption and discontinuity that leaves people guessing about what the future looks like. Next slide, please. So in terms of what this means for talent trends, these are places where we see evolution around some of the trends that I just mentioned as organizations really work to keep pace. So certainly a rise in the need for more specialized workers. So augmented reality, extended reality, those are skills that are increasingly in demand. and they command some of the highest pay in the market. Some examples, for telecom, to win the race to 5G, the US is expected to create more than 850,000 more new direct broadband and 5G jobs in the next several years. And that's on top of what's already a huge shortfall of skilled workers that are needed to deploy existing broadband across the country. So we see gaps emerging there. Other organizations, Disney, Epic Games, have announced plans to enter the metaverse, which means, again, more virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality demand for skills. Narrow and limited talent pools is something, again, that we're seeing organizations need to evolve beyond. Traditionally, in the media and entertainment space, hires have largely happened in more concentrated areas in traditional states like California and New York. And they've typically sought advanced degrees or specialized training in their candidates over direct job experience. That's not a luxury that can be afforded as much going forward. And so how to expand those talent pools and think differently about them, and whether that's expanding to consider more underutilized talent, setting up operations in smaller towns that are outside the traditional hubs, tapping government funding for minority groups to enter the telecom workforce. These are all things that we see organizations exploring and increasingly investing in. Unionization, worker activism has been very much present in the news streams. I think depending upon where you sit, it may feel like that's crested, but really for much of the media and entertainment industry, it continues to be on the rise, and we continue to see activism. And you can see that through some high profile recent walkouts and demonstrations. But it's also how organizations are responding to the increased demand for their workers to have a voice and to feel like they can push their organization towards a stronger social stance and a more purpose-driven set of values. This is particularly true in Gen Z, Gen X as well, but particularly Gen Z. And they're twice as likely to speak out and hold companies accountable for social issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, environmental impact, mental health support, et cetera. 71% of professionals, according to a recent LinkedIn report, would take a pay cut for a company who has a mission they believe in and shared values. So back to John's point about higher pay matters, but it's certainly not the only factor. And increasingly, we see a sense of social purpose, ethics, playing a much bigger role in why people choose to stay and how they speak out either on behalf of or in opposition to their company's actions. And then finally, boundaries that are increasingly disappearing. And that really shows up in a couple of ways. One, transferable skills. That skills are more and more transferable for several reasons, one of which being the real shift away from jobs and looking at worker skills. And as workers come to understand their skills and the market for those skills, they're more willing to jump industries, jump companies in pursuit of an opportunity. We also see them have more options, frankly, with the removal of a lot of location restrictions that they may have seen prior to the pandemic. So hybrid and remote work means boundaries around location and physical proximity are disappearing as well. Next slide, please. So as we think about these trends and what we see around how the future of work is changing, one key point, and I know this won't be lost on anyone, hybrid work is just simply more mainstream. And as of April of this year, 92% of technology, media, and telecom organizations, in a survey that we did recently, have implemented an official flex work policy. That means really you're talking about 8% of organizations that are either still on the fence or have chosen to go a different direction. That's a very small minority. And so if you look at the peer group and what you see peers doing, hybrid work becoming more mainstream and staying mainstream is really how we see that trend moving. We also know that data collection is expanding. So, more than 1 out of 4 companies have purchased new technology during the pandemic to passively track and monitor their workers. In some cases, that's about testing for productivity. In a lot of cases, it's about how to ensure that they're providing the kind of work environment and tools and resources that are going to maximize that productivity. And data to drive that is being more sourced, utilized, and applied as part of the workforce strategy. Well-being becoming more and more a key metric. So workers are prioritizing their own mental and physical health, and they look at those well-being resources and benefits much more closely than they did prior to the pandemic when they think about decisions in their own job packages on a new offer. And they're more likely to shop around and see what other organizations may offer and let that influence their own job search. And then finally, uncertainty is by all means the new certainty, right? So if nothing else, the events of the last 2.5 years have made one thing certain, and that's that certainty is a myth. Smart organizations have engaged in more scenario planning. They're shifting to more agile work modes to help future-proof the best they can. So with that in mind, John, I think I'm going to hand back to you to start sharing a little bit about a couple examples of what we see organizations doing, and we'll also share some examples of what we think could be good practices going forward. John, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry. If you can go to the next slide, please. So one example of what organizations are doing in light of this disruption is using storytelling to address the mental health crisis. A group of media companies and experts are coming together to tackle how mental health is portrayed in entertainment. The various partners, known as the Mental Health Storytelling Coalition, have set a goal to kind of change the narrative on mental health, according to a recent press release that came out about this. The coalition has developed a comprehensive mental health media guide to provide best practices and evidence-based recommendations to support storytellers in the industry, to help support them in how to tell stories, including mental health issues. And this announcement comes at a time when there's a spike in national suicide rates amongst young people, in addition to increase in depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges brought on by the pandemic. So very timely and very important response to some of the disruption being caused. Another example is upskilling programs. There's a program Amazon have invested heavily in this space. An example would be the Amazon Technical Academy. It's an upskilling program, and it targets Amazon employees that aspire to become software engineers. The benefits are pretty vast for Amazon employees if they're accepted into the academy, which is one of 9 academies across the upskill program, of which Amazon are investing $1.2 billion to equip more than 300,000 employees with new professional skills, which is pretty amazing. And the commitment is to really invest in the education and training for these people, so that they can have entry-level jobs into, for instance, software development, or software development engineer at Amazon. So a huge investment in upskilling. Great example of what organizations are doing to really address that issue. And then the final one is around Netflix. Netflix has a core philosophy that is pretty simple: people over process. And their focus on this principle has really differentiated them as an employer in a very competitive talent market. An illustration of this is their policy around their parental leave. They actually allow salaried employees, including birth and adoptive parents of any gender, to take up up to a year off with full pay following the birth or adoption of a child. They also have their policy of this philosophy of people over process also comes out in how they designed their vacation policy or paid time off. Pretty much it's take vacation when you need it, and discuss it with your manager. It's essentially a unlimited, untracked time off kind of approach, which is actually playing out rather well for them, or puts the tracking and the process, all of it, to one side, and really says, kind of take what you need and work with your manager, making sure you're being successful. And that's again, it's differentiating them in the market when you add those things up, the moves that they're making. So with those examples, this kind of reimagination of work that we're seeing around the workforce and workplace, it's gaining a lot of traction right now, and like no other time in recent history. And what we're seeing is that there's 6 main distinct shifts that we're seeing, and we're going to walk you through those 6. So if you don't mind moving to the next slide, please. The first of these shifts is from a traditional employee system to a workforce ecosystem. In light of all the talent challenges we've discussed in this session, leading organizations are rethinking their workforce strategy and their ecosystem to explore untapped talent internally and externally. They're taking steps to evolve into a skills-based organization where workers can kind of flex their skills and be assigned to projects based on the organization's needs and priorities, rather than be confined to a specific reporting line or a job description. And this in turn can significantly open up internal talent pools, and at the same time create development opportunities for the workforce, leading to better engagement and overall experience for the employees or worker. A leading telco has embraced this shift to help develop and meet the growing needs of the digital and technology skill set that they need for the broadband market. And if we look at the overall market, 1/3 of US workers are now identifying as gig workers or participating in the gig economy. And organizations really need to consider the opportunities that exist in this kind of fluid and contingent workforce that has been developing and building over recent years. This trend especially holds true when we consider the advertising, TV and film companies, where freelancing has really been a source of talent for a long time. And developing a solid strategy to access and enhance the talent experience for these workers can be pivotal to mitigating the effects of the Great Resignation, all these issues that we've discussed today. The second shift is reimagining the workplace, physical and digital workplace of the future through the lens of experience and productivity. One significant work-related consequence of the pandemic is that of hybrid work. It's here to stay. We just heard stats around it. 90+% of organizations are committed to a hybrid working environment. And while people are working remotely in that hybrid kind of arrangement, their digital experience really is their workforce experience. And unfortunately, that is not always a great experience. Many organizations are using 7 different tools for messaging, communications, file sharing, and scheduling. Most workers toggle between apps about 10 times an hour is the average, resulting in about 32 days of lost productivity per employee per year. And another stat, which I find is astounding, 40% of knowledge workers' time is really spent on work about work. With 1.2 billion knowledge workers globally, that equates to 1 trillion hours of low to no value work being done every year. The opportunity to increase productivity and in doing so, increasing people's experience of work is truly astounding. And because of that, many organizations we're seeing are actively working to reimagine their digital workplace, to ultimately design and deliver a robust digital workplace that enables business outcomes like productivity and innovation, and drives cultural elements. It also amplifies the worker's experience by augmenting their abilities to do work, by increasing their ability to collaborate across physical and digital places, providing them with insights and linkages to the organization's mission, and connecting them with people that they work with, and supporting their growth and development, and enhancing their well-being and their sense of belonging. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Karen to take us through some of the additional shifts that we've seen.
Great, thank you. You go ahead and go to the next slide. So some other things to consider as you work to respond to and get ahead of a lot of the trends that we've discussed. I talked about the real trend towards greater worker activism. And I think what becomes critical here is to really emphasize action in response to that activism. So workers who see and feel like they have raised their voices, but see little to no response from their company, or don't feel like their company is taking an active role, are much more likely to be dissatisfied, to the extent that they then either continue to speak out vocally or leave the organization. And so the taking action is the real critical point here. And it's not just about managing hot button issues. It's also about being able to look down the road towards what's potentially coming, knowing your workforce well enough to understand their sentiment, and understanding how the values of your organization are really demonstrated in the types of messaging, employment branding that you put out externally, and that's a lived experience of your workers internally as well. So giving employees a clear place to voice their opinions, and having that be secure, which doesn't always mean confidential. Transparency is an increasingly important value among Gen Z and other workers in the workforce. But that thoughtful, meaningful response and a commitment to actionable outcomes is key. You can look at ongoing pulse surveys. Again, we see organizations that do that on a much more regular basis to keep tabs on worker sentiment. You can also provide just open channels, and whether that's an anonymous, easy to use interface, whether it can be sort of a graduated or digital version of the old suggestion box, but the idea is to really create that two-way channel so that there's a place for the voice to be heard. Similarly, walking the walk on DEI as opposed to just talking the talk. Workers are increasingly really discerning about whether they see action taking place, and whether the words being proclaimed around diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization are actually authentic and lived all the way up to the C-suite. So it isn't just about doing the right thing. Ethics and profits are two sides of the same coin. So don't have to tell anyone here that the research around bottom line impact of diversity is there. Right, so diversity in content and amongst those who create it. A good example of movies that lack really authentic and inclusive representation underperform by more than 20% of the budget at opening weekend box office. There's plenty of data points to substantiate the bottom line impact and the top line impact of authentic diversity, equity, and inclusion in content development and in the workforce creating it. I think the other point here is that it not only lands well with consumers, but it also serves to increase the diversity of talent in your own organization. There's a flywheel effect here. So important as we think about storytelling and we think about recruitment strategies as well. We can go to the next slide, please. Two other things to consider. So resetting workplace perks in light of new ways of working. So we touched on this earlier, and the trends that we see around that were spurred by the pandemic, but frankly continue to create a flywheel of just new and different expectations around flexibility, around the workplace, and how workers will interact with that. So whether it's pet adoption funds, paid family leave examples, stipends, reimbursements, et cetera. I'll throw some numbers at you here. 43% of HR managers have said their company added new perks because of the pandemic. And we've also seen 60% of companies that have offered stipends or reimbursements for work at home office equipment. About almost 50% are now offering wellness programs directly related to mental and physical well-being. And they can include things like fitness benefits or additional mental health benefits on top of what was already being offered. And then rethinking entry qualifications and investing differently in how we develop the capability of workers. So that can mean really a focus on expanding and diversifying the skill sets, but it's also thinking differently around traditional entry points and qualifications that may inadvertently narrow the talent pool. So that may mean a greater emphasis on training programs to address labor shortage, bringing people in at more entry-level points, and then growing them up through the organization with investment more heavily in internal development programs. Using AI in the hiring process to focus on anticipated or expected skills rather than hiring for someone who's directly done the job before. So different ways to think about expanding the talent pool. So with that in mind, we've thrown a lot at you in terms of market insights and hopefully some useful ideas around how to respond. If you go to the next slide, please. I think the thought we'd like to leave you with is we are in a moment that is really truly human, right? And any connection that doesn't absolutely lean into people isn't going to go anywhere. And I love this quote from Bill McDermott. I think it really underscores the moment we're in. And it's not just this moment, it's really where we see the consistent expectations of our workforce going and the need for leaders and HR organizations to show up differently in meeting those needs. So if you go to the next slide, which I think is our last one here, we want to leave you with an offer that if you would like to go deeper on any of this, we do have a perspective or that you can check out either via the QR code here. You can also find it on our Deloitte website, but it's really specific to the telecom, media, and entertainment industry and expands on these ideas around how we move from a period of great disruption and great resignation into really reimagining the opportunities that it presents. And so with that in mind, I think we'll go ahead and shift to taking some Q&A, and we'll open that up to the chat. Feel free to also come off mute and just ask the questions directly if you prefer.
Okay, so there are some questions that we saw coming through in the chat. So maybe John and I can take a few minutes now and just address some of what we saw come through. We'd also encourage you, if you have some additional questions, go ahead and throw those into the chat now. They'll be monitored and we'll be able to pick some of those up. I think maybe a good place to start, and maybe John, do you want to take this first? I saw a question about whether there's been some increased interest in a shorter work week. And I think there's some examples we are seeing of that.
Yeah, so there's, kind of a fairly well documented example of Microsoft in Japan. They went to a 4-day work week and proved that the concept worked, that productivity actually stayed at the same rate. And there is a number of data points to point to, increased engagement, increased ability to attract and retain the workforce. So it's kind of been proven out, and I think a number of organizations are looking at it. It obviously depends on kind of the industry, and it may not be a one-size-fits-all, meaning the whole business may not be able to go in that direction. But we certainly we've seen the curiosity about this, especially with data points to prove that it works, and the commitment that it drives, and the other benefits, talent benefits that it gives. We're certainly seeing organizations kind of look at this and are currently looking at it now.
Great. I'm going to pick up one other in here because I think I can probably answer that pretty quickly. And that was around the model of hybrid work that we're seeing turn out to be the most common. Is it 3 days in the office, 2 remote? The answer is yes. I mean, frankly, that is turning out to probably be the most common. And it's interesting because we really spend, well, I guess I'll say, I personally spent a lot of time in this last year with different clients just around this question of what will turn out to be the new normal once all the dust clears, and how will people really work in a hybrid way? Will companies mandate a certain number of days back in the office, days at home? And I think organizations tried on all manner of different ways of doing this. What we're really seeing emerge as the dust is settling is that those who are choosing to put an expectation out around time in the office are typically asking that it's 2 to 3 days a week. And probably not surprisingly, it tends to follow a bell curve. So the majority of the employees are back in the office on Wednesdays. You see some volumes on Tuesday, some volumes on Thursday, and very little on Friday or Monday, unless there's an explicit expectation that that workers actually spread out through the week. So when it's a choice, it's typically when it's a choice, it's typically the middle of the week as a way that employees are working those 2 to 3 days. So yeah, not universal, but definitely what we're seeing emerge as the trend. There's another one here I think we can pick up too, and that was around with all the turnover in the past few years, what are we hearing about how those employees feel about their decisions to leave the job or the workforce? Like, how is that playing out for them? So if we said it was a great resignation, how's that working? There was actually a really interesting article just in the last couple of weeks, and if you want to go do a quick Google search, you can find it. I think it was in Inc. magazine, and it was the Great Regret. Are we entering the period of the Great Regret? Kind of the hangover from all those resignations, and the regret, where there are signs of it, it's really showing up kind of in two places. One, for some workers themselves who left because they felt the grass could be greener elsewhere. A large majority, I think it was over 72% of them, are saying actually the grass is not greener. They do have some regret for having made that move. And over half of them would say if they could get their old job back, they might take it. And then that regret is also playing out on the employer side, kind of the sense of, hey, we were in a talent crunch. We maybe paid more than we wanted to or should have, or maybe allowed some perks and benefits that now we're having to play through in order to get that talent in a moment when they needed it. Again, it's not universal, and it definitely does not signal a return to we can do away with all of the quote unquote concessions, perks, changes, flexibility that organizations have introduced. Those are still a strong expectation, and employee mental health and wellness is still at a huge premium. But what it does say is the grass is not always greener, and some, a majority of those workers who've changed are finding that that may or may not have given them the big reward they were looking for. So it's interesting. Again, one article, but I think it's something interesting to think about. We had a couple others here in the chat, and one in particular around the increase in the amount of paid family leave and whether we're seeing that result in some reduced attrition for employees. John, I can offer a quick thought here, but you may want to build on that. And frankly, I think it's frankly a little early. These are some programs that we're seeing come into place, and where they are targeted at a particular segment of the workforce, whether it's to help accommodate families who are struggling with balancing additional needs during the pandemic, whether they may be targeted at employees who have elders that they need to take care of. So I think what we are starting to see is that where the programs are targeted, there has been a very favorable response among those employee segments to that additional benefit. Whether it's broadly reducing attrition, I think may be too early to say. John, any additional thoughts there?
I don't have data on it, but clearly there's a cost to doing this, so it's an investment on the employer side. But what they're trying to drive towards is to increase their brand as an employer, of top talent, and to bolster loyalty from those employees. So I think kind of some degree time will tell, and I'm sure data will kind of prove it out. Don't have the data yet. It may exist out there, and if you have it, please share it with me. But that's what they're trying to do. They're going after employee experience, and they're the organizations that tend to do it are the ones that are kind of leading thinkers in kind of the talent experience market.
Yeah. Looks like there's a new one from the chat around any data on the speed of career advancement and how fast employees should promote, how fast employers should promote employees. Frankly, that's an interesting one. I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier in this segment around what is it that employees are looking for, what are workers looking for, and what might cause them to jump jobs. I don't think there's anything particularly new about the fact that it has long been an option or a tactic that employees will use to kind of get advancement if they don't see it coming within their organization. Meaning, if I jump roles or jump companies, I may see faster career advancement than if I stay in my own company. I think what we are seeing is more organizations trying to take that head on and recognizing that they can't afford for their talent to go elsewhere to get that advancement. And it's causing them to double down on career development programs. It's causing them to double down on re-examining their job architecture to see whether there are opportunities to add additional levels into that job taxonomy so that employees can see advancement more quickly rather than sitting for long periods within a single job level or job band. So I think what it's doing is it's exacerbating what's probably been a trend for many years, but in a tight talent market, this is causing organizations to really pinpoint and target this. Partly also because it's faster and more effective in many ways to develop the workforce you have than to constantly be seeking new workers from the outside.
Yeah, as an add to that, I think as we've been adjusting to kind of the Great Resignation, I think some, I don't know that it's organization wide that I've seen, but I think there are pockets of organizations and individual managers that maybe hired people into a higher role to be able to meet salary expectations that they wouldn't have been able to hire them if they hired them into perhaps a level down role. And I think that's part of this great regret kind of theme that employers got kind of desperate to hire people. They hired people perhaps into a stretch role for them. And of course, the performance is not there as expected. The expectation for the employee is mismatched. And that's why we're seeing this, this tension growing around kind of this great regret idea we're seeing.
Yeah. And I think we really, I know we just have a couple seconds left, but there was one question here that I think we could answer pretty quickly, which is how are we hearing about how heavily companies are weighing mission and purpose when they think about well-being, benefits, et cetera? I think the short answer is very heavily. Like, that's been a trend for a while, really looking as you see younger generations really valuing that as a big part of their value prop. So it's a big deal.
Yeah. A part of the whole kind of reflection that's happened for the last couple of years, and people really thinking about what they're doing and for whom, it's really been a theme of the Great Resignation.
And I'm just going to do a quick time check. If we have time to take more questions, we're glad to. I'm not sure if we've kind of hit our time and you're ready to move on to the next section. Okay, I'm going to figure we'll take one more. So one more, and I'll just go back to the chat again. There's a question around hybrid. And if the company isn't fully transitioned to a hybrid schedule, what can you do to stay competitive with those companies who are? I think part of it is, I guess the question I would ask there, if it's a matter of you just haven't figured it out yet and you're still kind of in the listen and learn mode, then I think you continue to listen and learn and try to follow the path of what your employees need, as long as it stays in line with the values of your organization. Yeah. If instead it's a matter, sorry, John, I just finished that thought. If instead it's a matter of, for whatever reason, your organization has decided hybrid work is not for you, and that there's an expectation of being fully back in the office, then I think I would hope that really is aligned to a broader employee value proposition that says, if we're not going to offer this flexibility, what are we offering in lieu? Because the reality is that is a highly competitive and increasingly table stakes expectation. And if you're not in a position to offer that, hopefully you are in a position to offer something else that you perceive as equally valuable.
The other thing that we didn't really talk about, I'll touch on in this, is that we talked about what's most common that employers are deciding to do. The overwhelming majority of the data that we get and are exposed to is that employees, they want flexibility, right? And if you're forcing people to come in, you must come in on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, that's not seen as flexibility. There are some advantages to it because of the predictability of it. But what employees are looking for, craving, and willing to move jobs and even industries for is flexibility.
So I think that may have been our last question. And again, I don't know if there's an opportunity. If so, we're happy to follow up on any that we weren't able to answer in the chat. But I would just say, on behalf of both of us, thanks for creating the space for us to join you today. It's a great opportunity to get to talk with you all.